All right, as you begin into intermediate accounting, I think there's a lot of challenges that it presents that may not have necessarily presented themselves in a principles course. Most importantly, when you get to intermediate accounting, we're kind of making a transition from a bookkeeping perspective to more of a broader accounting perspective, which of course still includes the bookkeeping aspects of accounting, but now there's an understanding that you're going to have to kind of get a little deeper and understand the whys and the motivation behind certain accounting practices and choices. And so, for that reason, some students tend to struggle when they're transitioning from a principles class, the core class, to an intermediate level accounting class. And so, this first one is just this first presentation is just meant to give you some pointers in order to maybe be more successful in intermediate accounting. So I just call it the three P's. The first P might seem obvious, but it's preparation. I think every professor has said this since the beginning of time, that the more you prepare, obviously the better you're going to do. But I think a lot of times in intermediate accounting, because it's numbers or because the topics sometimes are things you've covered in principles, you I think falsely assume that you've got it, you understand what we're going to do, and so you just sort of walk through the class, and before you know it, there are things in the lecture, the things that professor talks about that you didn't quite grab onto. And so I think it's important, kind of as a key takeaway, is you got to know where the train's going before you get on board. It'd be like taking a vacation and just getting on a train and having no idea where it's going. Well, you're going to get to that destination, but you're probably not going to enjoy the trip, and you're going to miss a lot of things along the way because you don't know what to look for. And the same thing is true in accounting. So even if you can't read everything, you can certainly at least review the topic, kind of know some of the examples and the things that the professor is going to go through, and then hopefully it allows you to learn a lot more as you're going through the lecture. The second P is perspiration. It's pretty easy. You've got to work hard. And I think that the thing here in intermediate accounting, you can never study too much. I mean, the reality is, I always tell students, after you've studied and you're kind of like, okay, should I study more? And the answer is yes. The answer is always yes. Study for another hour. And the reason why I say that is because if you have the time and energy, there's this short window where you're going to be marching through a lot of material in a very short amount of time. And so just your work ethic is going to be such an important component to your success. Of course, there are some students who are just naturally brilliant at accounting, but for most students, to get the grade that you want to be successful, you're going to have to work really hard in intermediate accounting to get through. So just prepare for that ahead of time. So the final P is perspective. And there are really two aspects to perspective that I want to talk about. First of all, I think sometimes in accounting, especially intermediate accounting, you kind of get really wrapped up in things, and you feel like, okay, this is one of the last classes or the last couple of classes that I need to take before I can start my career. And so all of a sudden there's this tension that can come in, and sometimes that tension can get in the way of your learning. And so it's great to be serious about your accounting education. It's great to be serious about what might lie ahead of you in terms of a career. But I think while you're walking through the process, like, just take it easy. Like, just don't be overly serious about everything. Nothing's the end of the world. And so I think having just sort of this gratefulness and this just, I think, this easygoing approach to the topic is just going to kind of free you up to learn more. And so I think it's really important not to take yourself too seriously while you're learning intermediate accounting. And the second aspect of perspective is you should have expectations of your professor. You should have expectations of the material. There's nothing wrong with that. I mean, the professor should be able to provide insight into the material and to dissect it in a way that allows you to understand it a little bit better. And the material itself should be challenging and rewarding when you understand it. And so I think kind of going in and saying, hey, I really expect to learn a lot in this class. I'm excited to learn a lot in this class. It's so important. But at the same time, you've got to be a bit reasonable. And I think the biggest piece of that is there's nothing that a professor can do necessarily to make you learn. I mean, that's just not something that anyone can do. They don't have some magic touch that all of a sudden just, but through osmosis or something like that allows you to learn the information. So that perspiration that we just talked about needs to be there. And so if you're not putting in that work, then it's probably not fair to have any expectations of your professor. But if you're working hard, like, have high expectations. Be excited about what you're going to learn. And I think if you have that perspective, it's going to be very freeing, and you're going to learn a lot more.